This is familiar. I'm going to take the moment to update it though, because there's apparently been a new version of this in Bolivia. If you're fans of John Oliver, you would have seen this story already, but if you haven't seen it, I'm gonna run it now, and then we will chat. Let's run some audio here. Hey, Professor, I got your email about the locust video. Did you want to run it first?
Terrific.
I have an update for you on that too. So
I would say, sure. Why don't we do it early on if you got it ready to go?
yeah, we actually have updates here.
You say update?
Mm-hmm. Sit, watch. You like this?
But it's no. We'll wait. We get.
Trust me.
Yes, trust him.
Trust me. See.
Bolivia, a country you think about.
You haven't seen this one yet, but trust me, you'll like this.
That's not Bolivia, that's Colombia, except it isn't. That's Venezuela. That is Colombia, except it isn't. That's Bolivia, which is the one we were looking for in the first place. Which one's Colombia? There is simply no way to know. The point is, the Bolivian city of La Paz has had long-standing problems with their roads, including traffic jams and a high rate of fatal accidents. And I know that you're thinking, wait, hold on. Your happy story involves fatal car accidents in Bolivia. Well, wait. Trust me. Because this is the solution they came up with.
Appropriating the image of the crosswalks called zebras and dressed in a costume of the animal by the same name, these young people have been going into the street of the city of La Paz for the past 13 years with the goal of educating the citizens with love and changing the chaotic face of the vehicular traffic in this city.
Admit it, you didn't see that coming. Not a single one of you was sitting there going, traffic zebras, I'm calling it traffic zebras. Yes. Now, these zebras don't have policing powers like the ability to issue tickets or make arrests. Instead, they just tease people. And if you look online, and I cannot recommend you do that enough, there is incredible footage of them in action. You can see everything from a zebra holding his head while a man jaywalks, to one dancing and spinning around in front of a speeding van that stops just in the nick of time, to this zebra risking his life to stop a car, to the many clips of zebras dancing, every single one of which, especially the last one, is absolutely superb. Watch him throw that down. And at this point, you may be wondering, how did this happen? Well, it was based on a similar program in Colombia, where they dispatched traffic mimes to monitor pedestrians. And as far as having mimes rove around your city, I think we can all agree, no. Not only is it tremendously unpleasant, but being mocked by a mime doesn't even work. All you have to say is, I can talk and you can't. Argument one, you lock him in a glass box and you walk away. But Bolivia has really taken it up a notch with this whole zebra business. The program started with just 24 of them, and today, in La Paz alone, there are 265. That is a population boom so great it puts actual zebras to shame. And that is saying something, because zebras notoriously have no shame. Put it away. Put it away. That thing is a liability. Tuck it away. And while it may look like fun for people, this is a real job with strict rules.
They explain some of the rules to be zebras, like honor the costume, don't eat when you work, never take your head off.
That is a good rule. Never take your head off. You cannot risk shattering an innocent child's belief that you are a real, free-roaming bipedal talking equid 6,000 miles from Africa. And by the way, that applies even in interview situations. There are many clips of reporters shoving microphones in zebras' faces. Even one with a zebra giving an interview to another zebra.
This is very significant for me. I really like what I'm doing, and it's not just about telling people what to do.
Come on! Every interview is improved by a zebra head. There's a lesson for everyone there. Stressful interview in 60 minutes? Put on a zebra head. Tough questions on the red carpet? You put on a zebra head. Sean Spicer, get yourself a zebra head, man. What is wrong with you? here's the thing. It doesn't just help with Bolivia's traffic. Many of the people in those costumes really need the work.
Many of the zebras are young people who are recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. It's a way for them to get their lives back on track and to give something back to society.
Look, they're not only getting their lives on track. I'm pretty sure the existence of these zebras is the only thing keeping my life on track right now. And is it any wonder how beloved these cebritas are, considering the attitude that they project?
Nunca dejas de ser cebrita. Siempre es cebrita y te lleva esa cebrita del corazón a donde sea que vayas.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you, Antoine. We are updated. I'd love if you could please send me the link and we can use
Sure.
Use it in the future.
You going to the podium now?
Why don't we have some discussion and see how far we go, and then maybe bring in the MOCUS link that I have. But the background out of which that emerged is two mayors who have been mayors of Bogota, Colombia, off and on for the period for about 15 to 20 years. Peñalosa and MOCUS. And they have revolutionized the political culture. So the bigger theme which that raises, which you can almost see there, but which is very explicit in the case of MOCUS, is that rather than defining the problem in terms of what do we do, which policy do we pursue, which is the way most public policy analysts, most textbooks on public policy, most consulting firms, most academic courses will tell you to do. Will say maximize the preferences of your constituents. I mean, the economists, the psychologists generally assume preferences are there. Let's say economists, psychologists, not always. And many policy analysts will say, you know, we have to work within what's feasible, what's doable. MOCUS did the opposite. He said, well, we want to change the preferences. We want to change the rules of the game of the citizens of Bogota. And he was a brilliant guy. He was the son of an artist. His mother was an artist. He was, I think he's Estonian. He's Central European, M-O-C-K-U-S. Is not a Latin American name, but his parents migrated to Colombia. He grew up mostly in Colombia, but he got a doctorate in mathematics in France. He was professor of math. He became the president of the National University in Colombia. So but he was interested, as that suggests, in math, and more than that, he was interested in educating and helping people solve their problems. But sometimes by saying, you don't really understand what your problem is. One of the biggest problems was crime. When he had a conference on political culture and how to transform it for local policy use. Imagine that as a topic. I mean, I've never heard of or been to a conference in the US or most of Western Europe where people say, we want to change the local culture in order that we have whole new options to pursue. But the zebras show you a flavor of what MOCUS did. So the idea of using zebras or the arts or all kinds of things to shock people and say, don't just do it the way you did in the past. Let's think of totally outside the box new ways of doing things. That was the bigger message. And it caught on so well that he and Peñalosa basically have altered. They have term limits. You can only serve once or maybe twice. And so after 4 years, then another one would come in. Then there was another person or so who came in for a bit. But Peñalosa is now mayor of Bogota today. And we've had a series of students who've documented this with us and others. They're books on MOCUS. There's a chapter in the book which is one of our key readings, required readings for the course. There's a chapter on MOCUS. So take a look at the chapter in Kentuckville Karaoke on MOCAS, and you get more and some links to some of these other things. But the bigger point is it's transforming the culture, and that is that in a sense is cultural place making. That is, how can you, and so how to do it. One of the bigger background drivers is and which is making this not unique to one city in Latin America, but much more general, is the breakdown of the traditional left and right, the traditional parties. And so, where has this happened most dramatically and powerfully in the last week? France. So we have both, I mean, the 2-3 leading political parties in France, and parties have dominated French politics far more than in the US. So to have the leading parties ousted and to have, Ms. Le Pen, her was a new challenging party, and Macron, who won, basically had no party. He created his own party a year ago, so he came out of nowhere. So nowhere in the sense of traditional party programs. Yet he came out of a position which responds to the preferences and the votes of a majority of French citizens. And that is the bigger theme which we've seen for 20 years or so in the new political culture books, where we've seen new challenges to the normal left and right are winning if the parties are not too strong. And so where and how the parties can be weakened is a major factor. So in the US and Canada and Australia, this happened earliest. It happened at the local level, where parties are often weaker, especially in a federal system like Canada, the US, and Australia, but not so, say, in England, where they've had the Anglo traditions, but they have strong parties at the local level which prohibit this kind of thing from coming up from the bottom, or they make it much harder. At least the parties try to prohibit it. And France is basically the same, and not wanting these kinds of local innovations. All right. So if that's some of the background, let me just make the very simple point. Fiscal caution, or fiscally, I would hesitate to say conservative, but at least caution, let's say, or fiscal responsibility is how it's sometimes discussed, combined with a social progressiveness, egalitarianism, equal rights, non-discrimination, women, gays, etc. That is a new lifestyle. The combination of these two is what you have expressed by the majority of citizens across the US, North America, and much of in Japan, and a fair number, certainly with the younger people. Within the US, or within these countries, we have, of course, the maps that you've seen from our Trump's analysts. Three of them are here today. Sam, Kelton, and Eric. There's 6 working on this. But remember that the map which they have done, basically, is very similar to the map you've seen from Christina. That is, it's the South and the small Midwestern towns where you have family values, traditional patterns of lifestyle. And on the 2 coasts, you have the opposite. Bohemia in strong form, but weaker form individualism, we can call it. Social individualism, economic individualism, governmental individualism, doing new policies in that sense of governmental individualism. The 2 coasts, and of course, Chicago. So at least certain neighborhoods of Chicago have this, and we have battles within Chicago, and that's why we can look at these themes in broader comparative perspective in this way. So let me dig out my notes. I've got a number of themes here, and I don't want to wander too much, but I've got to use my machine, as we've got new ways of addressing some of this stuff. So we're dealing with hot button topics, including gender, gentrification, and more. But what I'm trying to do is not deal with them solely and in isolation as if they're things which we don't have a background, but I'm trying to locate them. I'm trying to say when you will have hot button topics for the rest of your life. You'll have crises to deal with. What I'm saying is when you're going to your new job, take a copy of some books with you, flip through, and you've got propositions, you've got lessons, you've got typologies, which maybe you can adapt and apply even to new hot button issues which will be changing for years to come. So try where you can to say, what is this sort of like? How can we adapt this perspective, or where can we bring in some analysis that will make more sense of it? There's not one right approach, but you are self-conscious and explicit that you can use multiple alternatives and lay out clear options for yourselves and for others you may be working with. So if you're an assistant mayor, if you're a policy consultant, if you're a journalist, if you're a lawyer, you can discuss these interpretations in a more sharply informed way with some examples that we've got here. Let me mention one more, which is what led me to find MOCUS, for instance. Los Angeles, national U.S. context. Robert Putnam, we talked about, did Bowling Alone. Following Bowling Alone, he worked with local groups, and there were about 50 civic groups in neighborhoods and metro areas across the U.S. that did citizen surveys of what they wanted, what they felt about their local governments, what they liked or disliked. And one central set of themes were civic activities and trust. And basically, then they repeated these, and nationally, the place that had the lowest trust, the lowest civic engagement, the most anger, the most dissatisfaction, the fewest people who would talk to their neighbors, and the people who would shoot each other or shout through their car windows or roll down the car windows and shout actively at each other were which metro area?
LA. Los Angeles.
There we go. Yes. Want to say a word or two about LA in this respect?
Eric's from LA.
Okay, Eric. Yeah, several of you are from LA, and 3 or 4 of you are working on a comparison of LA and New York in terms of some of the underlying cultural issues, which is great. Okay, so, well, I'll jump on it. We can, well, and Eric, but you've heard me say a little bit already. Eric, you want to throw in anything at this point?
About LA?
About LA in sort of broader cultural context in that sense. Or is that too vague?
I guess for me, an important aspect of LA is like the Hollywood culture, and I mean, we've done readings on this in class. That seems to pervade it. I know like everything's like in relation to a lot of like proximity to Hollywood, and the whole celebrity culture is pretty big there, and that I don't know, like the healthy lifestyle. Driving is pretty big. If we're just talking in vague like LA lifestyle.
Okay, but part of that LA lifestyle is strong individualism. I am a star, or I want to be a star, or if I'm a director, I want to feature multiple stars and have them in my film. I want to advertise the film. I want to have names of already successful stars, and if I can get a new person who's rising up, fine. But the star system, which is that in a sense you can say, is quintessential individualism gone wild as it was carried from Europe, let's say from the Middle East with the ancient Jews and the Greeks, into Europe with the Roman Empire, the Christianity and so forth, on up to then the Protestant Reformation that I'm reiterating, reminding you of Eleazar, carried then to Switzerland, the Netherlands, lowlands of Scotland, into New England, and then where did it go? West. And so you had some people who were the more traditional who stayed on the East Coast, But those who were the more individualistic, the more adventuresome, they kept going west. And so LA in that sense is a continuation of these themes that we have elsewhere in more extreme manner. And I know that you elaborated some of this when I after the session that when I was in the meeting, which is great. So I'm building on that. Okay. Within LA, for instance, Mike Davis has a book, City of Quartz, for instance, and he'll talk about the tourist entrepreneur, real estate industry, good part of the film industry that sort of wants to say, come to California, surfing, beautiful women, bikinis, everybody's gorgeous here. You know, why don't you leave Youngstown, Ohio, and come to where the real folks are terrific. Okay, that's one LA theme. The second LA theme is the radical left. This is bad. We want revolution. The third LA theme is we can call it Mexican immigration is a major carrier, and so you have the challenge of the older WASPy establishment in downtown LA with the new minorities, Mexicans, and you have you now have battles going on across neighborhoods within LA. That is, I was fascinated with this stuff at a distance. I taught at UCLA 10 years plus ago, and I trained for a marathon. So I ran in different neighborhoods trying to see what's going on, and went to lots of meetings to try to see how some of these things work. And you have these competing groups with one another within LA and in literature about the city and interpretations. Low trust. What to do about it? Everybody agrees on that. Front page of LA Times. Black gangs are fighting with Mexican gangs, and the Mexican gangs are generally winning. The poor black guys are being beaten back as the numbers of African Americans is relatively small compared to, say, Chicago, and the Mexicans are larger in number, and they're basically doing in the blacks. The details of this gory murders go on every week in the front page of the LA Times. I talk about Chicago's crime wave. It's been like that in LA for years, with explicit discussion of gangs, as well as adding sometimes some music, some culture, some rap, and some stuff like that. They're doing it in LA as here. Okay. The policymakers, let's say the city council member, the mayors, and the others, saw these distrust problems. They saw the low ranking that the Putnam survey came out with was not altogether distant. About 15 or so years ago, roughly, Hollywood and the San Fernando Valley voters said, we want to secede from the county. We want to have our own local governments. We don't want to be part of this bigger stuff at all. And roughly 40% of the voters said, yes, secede. In a sense, it was like Brexit. Okay, that in turn was a wake-up call, you could say, to the city council, who said, you know, maybe we're not doing a very good job of responding to our citizens. Huh. Have you heard this before? Okay, so same kind of issues is being discussed with Brexit and so forth, and Trump and Macron. What to do? The big policy option was what they knew from graduate school at Berkeley or having read Putnam at Harvard was what? Tocqueville. Local, more citizen participation, more local, small responsive local government. So instead of having a handful of small city council, great big wards, they said, let's create 90 little neighborhood councils all around LA, and people can participate more, then that will solve the problem. Did it solve the problem? No. It worked, that is, it was fine in the places that didn't need those, Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and so forth. It didn't make it any better in the Mexican low-income black areas. Evaluations by USC staff I went to in a number of meetings. So what to do? So people were and are still arguing about this in LA. My suggestion was, don't just look at, that is, my suggestion was, the underlying, that is, this is the big point. Don't just look at a theory, you saw this before. Organized groups lead to trust. That's Putnam, that's Tocqueville. What are we adding? Context. Look at the context. What are the values of the African Americans, the Mexicans, and others, which may transform the ways that these things work? That is, don't just say the Mexicans ought to be different, or they mean, why don't we go back to Mexico? Why don't we go to Latin America, and within Latin America find some things that solve the trust problems? Why go to Latin America? One, because the Mexicans are from there. But two, because Mexico and Latin America have the lowest levels of trust in the entire world. Africa, in some cases, is equal. But the fact is, these are semi-developed, developing countries like Argentina, Brazil. They got they've got very low trust. The smartest people within Latin America generally are still saying, that is, the social scientists, like Alberto Moreno in Mexico, are still saying Tocqueville. We need more citizen participation. They're not looking at explicitly about how to join the values and the configurations with specific ways of participating. But some mayors have done so, including especially Mocus. So that's why we have the video. And there's more we can show you, but you get a bottom line in this new version of the Zebras, which is great, and it also shows it's not just one city, but it can be generalized. And it mentioned also people who may be forgotten what it said, drug dealers, criminals, people who've been let out of jail, prostitutes, former prostitutes, etc. Those people have been arrested in Bogota, and they can say, you can pay the fine, you can go to jail, or you can work as a mime for free or for low wages for a couple of years. So that's in part how they got the people recruited. Similarly, they fired the whole traffic police department in Bogota, several thousand of them, say, you guys are just corrupt. All you're doing is taking bribes from the poor people. When you pull them over, you say you'll give them a ticket, they give you X dollars, and you let them go. You're all fired. So when Mocus became we got a great scene with his chief of staff, who basically fired the traffic police, and then the traffic police were told, either you're out of a job or you can be retrained to work as a mime. So they had, talk about retraining, job options, okay? This was a heavy-handed way to do it, but it worked. Traffic fatalities dropped enormously. Those Zebras stopped accidents. The mines worked in these cities in ways which dramatically. But most of all, it sent a shock to the citizens. We're not following the traditional payoffs, clientelist, old politics. We're doing new things. Okay. So my suggestion was, for LA and for around the world, don't just always accept the past, but at least think about, could we be inspired by Mocus? Where and why might we be able to do things differently? And the title of this course is Urban Innovation. So at least think about ways that you can do new and different things by borrowing from some of the most innovative people around the world. Okay. All right, if that's the general lesson, the general background, let's follow again a little bit more with a couple of specific hot button issues. And two of them, I'll say a few words about it, are gender and gentrification. Okay, gender's a hot button topic today. What are some themes that link gender to points in our readings? And with the spirit of the course. If we start with some of the issues that have been widely debated, like Trump's locker room comments on women, released in the middle of the campaign, and his assertion that Hillary Clinton did not have enough stamina to serve as president, we can see elements of the classic macho warrior tradition are still alive and well, and precise, although how much precisely difference they made with which citizens is something that it will take years and our six Trump analysts and more before we can answer with precision. But the point is, this is not just 2,000 years ago or 200 years ago. This is alive and well in the U.S. among voters today, as it is in other places. If we switch to, say, France or Asia, where families are stronger than in the U.S., that is, the U.S. is generally highly individualistic, despite what Trump is saying. If we switch to France or Asia, where families and patriarchy are more widespread, we have massive numbers, nevertheless, of young women, 20s, 30s, who refuse marriage in traditional family mothering roles. There's a cover sketch of The Economist magazine a couple of years ago showing an Asian woman walking away into the distance from a man who's on his knees holding up a rose. You know, come and be my wife. She's walking away from him, leaving him with the family farm. Okay. Family farm literally in Korea, well, I'll come back to that in a second, but more generally, the marriage rates of young women in several Asian countries, Korea, Japan, as well as in France, have decreased. That is, there are fewer people are getting married. They're getting married later. They're having fewer children. There are more divorces, etc. That is, there are more individualized gender roles that are being embraced by especially women, but also some men who go along with them in various ways, such as the new president of France. What's his wife do? How old is he and how old is she?
She's like 20 years older.
She's 24 years older than he is. What was their relationship before? They started working together when he was 15, 16, something like that. What was she? How did she enter his life?
As theater teacher.
Theater teacher, drama coach. So he wanted to be an actor. He needed coaching. She helped out, and now years later they're married, but not quite the normal Korean family farm kind of stuff. I mean, he also is a pianist, a performing pianist at a semi-professional level. So he's trained to be in the limelight, to be a pianist, to be an actor, not to be a party leader. No, he said, this is the position of the Socialist Party. This is the position of the right party. I mean, he didn't learn the party rules. He learned to be an individualist, an artist who would show empathy, perhaps with the artistic work, with aesthetics, and maybe with an audience. But he didn't ask the audience, are you a card-carrying member of my party or not? No. In that sense, he's like the new political culture. He also was an investment banker. He was also, in that sense, you would think had a conservative background, but he worked within the Socialist Party as a minister to try to get the economy working. He then fought with the socialists. He quit. They kicked him out, and so forth. So he's doing innovative stuff which doesn't fit with any normal party of the left or the right. Okay, these things if you wrote that as a job description, we have thousands of mayors, local officials doing this around the world. In that sense, it's part of the new political culture. in that sense, again, he's going to have huge problems in terms of implementation. I mean, that's whatever we want to call it, political policy making, because people disagree with him. But again, this is classic. These kinds of mayors and policymakers are fighting with the unions. They're fighting with the traditional parties. They're fighting with the normal ways of doing stuff. But that in turn drives them to be innovative, to look for innovations like, you know, don't just hire more traffic police, fire the traffic police and try mimes. I mean that's pretty revolutionary. But sometimes it works. Okay, how can you communicate with citizens? Don't use the party regulars. Don't just say precinct captains will go around. Don't just use advertising in the normal way, as Hillary Clinton did. Use Twitter, social media. The media generally, that is, these are ways that these new leaders are transforming the rules of the game. And how you do it, for instance, being a pianist or an actor, the arts can help you generate a buzz that's a more powerful, aesthetically driven, and match it to various subgroups, neighborhoods, subgroups that you're speaking to, and so forth. This has been going on a couple of decades, articulated by national leaders Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, especially, but as I say, especially locally, as it fits better locally for mayors and city council members all around the world, and they in turn can get their ideas from citizens, from neighborhood groups who are building new creative spaces like Theaster Gates. So how can we generalize up, in part by having the ideas or the inspiration of the Theaster Gates bubble up? Just think briefly of some of the ways that the arts feed into these processes, as we've read about them in part already. So the traditional warrior, the macho European knight, the Japanese samurai, these were professional fighters. You can find this in ISIS today. You can find this in professional armies, such as the American Army is a professional army. We no longer have a draft. Vietnam was the last war we fought with a draft. You saw how disastrous that was politically. So we now have highly paid professional warriors who do a brilliant job in that sense, but that's very different from the massive populist armies of the past. And you can find the warrior mentality in street gangs in Chicago and LA, who are killing each other off in American cities, as well as aspects of the Mexican drug traffic, and of course the Middle East with ISIS. And not just ISIS fighting against a bunch of others. The complicated point is that we have surrounding all of us different models, so that there's not any one that is, if life just had to say, you know, here's what you got to do, here's a job description, implement it, fine. But you're often maybe looking for a job where there is no job. You may have to create your job description. 66% of all new jobs in the US, and this has been found as well in Western Europe, are created by firms with 20 or fewer employees. They may have no job descriptions because they don't know they need you. You can find them. You can also, after a few years of doing this, you will be creating new jobs because you'll be creating new firms yourselves. That's the model of the future based on the last 20, 30, 40 years. Yes, we have Apple, but what was Apple 30 years ago? You know, jobs. You know, so Steve Jobs. Okay, it was one guy. That is, Apple was not, that is, it's similarly, we've had big corporations through the 20th century in the US, but if you look at the biggest corporations, you look at the richest people and so forth, they change. The types of industries, automobiles was great stuff when Henry Ford was starting out, but look at the automobile industry under Obama, it was bankrupt. IBM was hot stuff in the 40s and 50s. IBM, you know, is traditional. So Google, all the Facebook, these things are changing continually. And they were nothing. These were little firms for people. They started by small numbers of people in earlier years. Okay, so this stuff is being, that is, there are multiple competing perspectives that are being bounced off each other in talk shows and feminist support groups, student discussions, and the Western transformation of the warrior knight, and and where and how the rights and gender roles have changed, started in part in the West with chivalry. The idea that is the idea that the knight could win the lady's hand by writing poetry, by singing with his guitar under her window. That is the idea that the arts could transform the macho sword into romantic love. Okay, so romantic love came in the 19th century, but the ways that the arts could link with this and go beyond the sword alone is a major theme which we've seen in our readings, especially Habermas. So Habermas has got the historical background, and he especially contrasts the continent, where you had a stronger amount of warrior, you had tough authoritarian political leaders. Most of the principalities, these monarchs, the Prussians, the French, I mean, they were tough, hierarchical. They didn't want any political opposition or challenging stuff, in contrast to England. So in that sense, his big contrast with the court life and how the court life differed from place to place is key in the historical past in defining what's legitimate or what were proper gender roles. Who were women? What could women do? What could they not do? And contra the normal sort of view that women were not important on the continent, he stresses, listen, because the king was so absolutist in Versailles, the court life was about who's having dinner with whom, who's having an affair with whom, and so forth. That is, the courtiers and the salons which these women would oversee before and after the Revolution, and dominating 19th century France up through Proust and so forth. These kinds of themes were places where women were the leaders. But their gender roles were not the same as in other locations. So Habermas goes into a fair amount on this, but I would say he overly stresses social class. That is, he links it to the aristocracy versus the bourgeoisie, and that's partly it. But if the way I've put it, if you try to say how much variance is explained by that, it's not 100%. It's not perfect, although it's a good place to start. That is the in the say 19th century works of Byron's Don Juan or Don Juan, or the Moliere, or the later Rossini or Mozart versions of Don Juan, you have the macho guy who wants to conquer women. Okay, so where and how this then changes, becomes humorous, becomes ludicrous, becomes something that you can ironically make fun of in various of these writers. Lord Byron, I mentioned. Stendhal's Red and the Black, the classic work which today French students in secondary school read parts of Stendhal in order to say, and they say, one, what does it mean to be French, but also what does it mean to be a man or a woman? They're teaching gender roles and flirtation, chivalry, denial, refusal of an advance. These are all central themes, and Stendhal is still the master of how you should do this, which French secondary school students read. Okay, it's not the stuff. The Americans would say it's risque, but it's classic stuff in that upbringing. By contrast, in Asia, Ruth Benedict, The Chrysanthemum in the Sword, is required reading for Japanese, or was required reading for Japanese high school students. What does it mean to be Japanese? Ruth Benedict, American anthropologist, explains this in her famous book, Patterns of Culture. Chrysanthemum in the Sword is the one that they read. Chrysanthemum in the Sword for Japan. And so what's the key gender? It's not just gender, it's a more general role for children. A core theme for Japan is indebtedness, that you are in huge debt to your parents because they brought you into the world. They brought you up, and without them you would be nothing. Therefore, you must spend your entire life trying to repay and help your parents who created you in the whole first place. Therefore, you should get a job where you can support your parents and try to help them as they get older, and therefore you should not just be concerned with yourself. You should think of your parents and the family first. And so these values are shockingly in conflict with what's called Western individualism. But I'm making the point that we have within the West, we have multiple variations of these, but the contrast with the Asian at least highlights how the Northern European, the Southern European goes further still in the Middle East or in Asia. And a key player in which Habermas points to as well is family structure, family values, and those in turn inform the broader aspect of gender, and then the public policies which feed and link with this about placemaking. Is we can't deal with everything, but things that fit with our course. So I mentioned the anti-traditional family roles within the Asian context. What's the biggest program for nonprofits for the government today in terms of cultural policy in Korea? Helping new young wives who come from Vietnam, from China, from Indonesia, who are marrying the Korean farmers, because the young Korean talented women like Hee-sun are not marrying the Korean farmers. They're going abroad, or they're going to Seoul. And so we have, and the same thing with the young French women, that they're not just marrying and carrying on a traditional family on the farm. The most talented are doing things which are so there are books on, for instance, the hundreds of thousands of young French women who are now living in England. They're not part of the English census. They don't get English government rights and so forth. Nobody knows exactly how many there are because they don't fill out the normal census forms. But they're French sociologists who've studied some of this, and they're saying, hey, this is challenging our normal definitions of what's right and wrong, and government cultural policies of what they call in France patrimony, patrimoine. How can we maintain the culture of and so in terms of Hee-sun's presentation, you've heard her talk about the battle between Bohemia, but behind Bohemia is a more general concept of individualism, and that's really what I'm talking about today. As you see this in the works that I'm referring to here, identified with the 19th century, written about in the semi-avant-garde literature from Balzac to Baudelaire. But the point is that this is now mainstream and is debated about by presidential candidates in France, in the U.S., and more. The young Chinese talk about this as Western individualism, but I'm dissecting a bit of it as its various completing elements linked to gender today. Okay, and so let's transition with someone who's written both on gender roles and on placemaking. Japonica Brown Saraceno, and her reading is the main event we have in this little section. It's very thoughtful stuff, but she's just a follow-up to make this linkage more explicit. She has a lead paper in I think it's the American Journal of Sociology about 6 months ago, and it's a new book on the way, and she's a lesbian herself. She's studied lesbian lifestyles in 4 different cities across the U.S. And the point is going from a small town in Maine to Ithaca, New York, to somewhere else, and then a sort of avant-garde women in bikinis in California. You have dramatically different gender roles. So in Ithaca, there were sort of suit-wearing, high-heeled business women. In California, bikini teasing, flirting with each other, and so forth. That is, they're dramatically different sort of urban, local variations of what's it mean to be a lesbian in these different cities across the U.S. So this is interesting in the sense it totally refutes the national kind of social movement perspective, say that gays and lesbians want this, LGBT, etc. That's the dynamics here. We've got conflicting, what I'm pointing out are the conflicting dynamics. You've mostly seen the national stuff from the talk shows, from the national, and the model, of course, the successful model is the civil rights movement. That Martin Luther King, the NAACP, etc. folks were super successful in having an impact on creating affirmative action, public policies, which have made a huge difference for African Americans. And these are still the model of a successful new social movement which might do the same. And so the environmentalists, the human rights folks, the gays and others often took the civil rights movement as a model. But this leads to national talk shows, national policies. By contrast, the strong individualism, which underlies a fair amount of this today, is that these are much better, individual preferences are much better considered at the local level and a neighborhood level rather than a citywide level, where you can have people like Gordon Douglas's DIY activities, where you have people on one street will say, you know, we got a leaky pipe here, it's going all over the street. Should we call the city department of whatever, Public Works? We know if we call them it's going to be 6 months before it fixes. So what do? They build a little bridge themselves. Okay, so that kind of responsive public policy and individualism is not something you want to say. We want a national policy of everybody should fix their leaky pipes themselves. So, I mean, it's laughable as a national policy, but he's pointing out this may make a lot of sense if we're dealing with little things, piecemeal at least. So it's not as if it's the one or the other, but we shouldn't forget the local with the focus on the national talk shows. Okay, the gentrification, just one or two themes. Japonica Brown-Saraceno nicely reviews some of the major past work. The main statement is Logan and Molich, Harvey Molich. It's called City of Fortune. Urban
Fortunes.
Sorry?
Urban Fortunes.
Urban Fortunes. Okay. They have a neo-Marxist take which basically says the goal of cities is the goal has been driven by the developers. The developers want to make money. They want to increase land value. They want to increase return in their capital. And they give contributions, they give bribes to political leaders. The political leaders follow them. And major national urban policy is just increasing land value, making money, and gentrifying. If there are poor people in the way, drive them out, squash them. And so the local activists, which she talks about, Japonica Brown-Saraceno, she calls pioneers. What were these people called in Chicago when they started arriving and they wanted to move into a place, say a neighborhood like Bridgeport, where you had strong Irish traditions and Irish bars. So they wanted to move into a Polish neighborhood, North Milwaukee Avenue, where there were bars, and they might walk into a Polish-speaking bar or whatever. The Chicago Tribune, that is, and I'm pointing to Chicago specifically because Chicago has stronger neighborhood traditions and stronger ethnic politics traditions. What were these people called by the Chicago Tribune writers who started to notice that this was a new dynamic as these people were coming to Chicago? Yuppies. Okay, so the term yuppie was stressed by the Chicago Tribune and its writers, and it's then generalized. And the image that is, this is the image of the Logan and Malich urban fortune, is that these yuppies come in, they drive out the locals who really have owned the neighborhood for years, and they destroy good traditional ethnic culture. They destroy the Polish food, the Irish, the Irish bars and so forth. That's the image. And so the quick point I'm making is that Logan and Malich lay out what has been considered and is still used in the heads of many policymakers, many developers, many critics of this will say, this is gentrification and we don't want it here. Okay, Japonica Brown Sorosino points out yes, this is going on. Some people are like this. Some people are, she calls them pioneers, or you call them yuppies, for instance, in the sense that they're destroying the culture and the neighborhoods into which they move. But what's the point of the introduction of the book? What's the point of the typology? There are two other kinds of people who may move into a neighborhood. And the key thing which makes them different is that they may say, I would like to move into this Polish neighborhood or into this older Swedish neighborhood. She studied two of them. Two of her neighborhoods were in Chicago. This is a Northwestern PhD. Andersonville and, what's it called? Argyle. These neighborhoods have strong cultural traditions, and I'm attracted by them. And so she talks about how lesbians who move into Andersonville learn to dance the maypole dance in the traditional Swedish way, even if the women who move in may be from Korea or from Argentina or wherever. That is, the Swedish traditions can be carried on by people who are not from that original ethnic stock. And so the culture, and especially when you get to new combinations of subcultures, and you don't need to talk about solely old-fashioned ethnic primordial ethnicity, but you also have things like bicycle subculture or bohemian subculture or band playing subculture or baseball. That is, there are dozens and dozens of subcultures in big cities today, and the big point is many of them are not ethnically based. They're not just the background that you inherited physiologically, whatever. People are redefining that they want to be part of this or that subculture, along with a lifestyle and the culture that goes with it. And so the arts, the social media say, where's the hot place and why is it hot? What's it different? Can I do? So, hey, yeah, they got mimes over in that neighborhood. What are the mimes doing? Oh, go to the bar and see. You go, the bars in Chicago, for instance, just when a quick not silly, extreme illustration. 20, 30 years ago, on Halloween and New Year's Eve, people stayed at home and they had their parties or they went to big parties or whatever. Now, if you go to some of the hot bars on Halloween or New Year's Eve, and they have costume contests. Preparing for these for a month or two before Halloween and before New Year's Eve, you have all these shops that spring up that are selling costumes. And so selling or renting. So you may either buy or just rent a costume for one night, but there's a book called Philadelphia Ghetto showing how the Puerto Rican neighborhood basically has been doing this for decades. But it's not just the kids, the parents, put the makeup on little girls. They get their 7-year-old girls, they get their eyebrows fixed up, they get fantastic little outfits they make for them. This goes back to Christina's home city, Mardi Gras. Okay, that is the Mardi Gras is this a yuppie elite phenomenon? Who works hardest on the Mardi Gras in Latin America?
The working class.
The poor people. Where does it come from? Spain. These were Roman Catholics in different neighborhoods who would fight with one another in different neighborhoods, as they did in some Italian cities. But the point is, the average poor people created these floats. And today, in the book, there's a book by an African-American author on the Puerto Rican style within Philadelphia, how culture is used to transform the neighborhood. And now this Puerto Rican neighborhood in Philadelphia is a hot place for tourists. So he went in, he's on a tour bus, they have people on the bus playing the guitar, singing songs, etc. That is, the culture is being used in a new way to recreate or transform the cultural space. And it's in the broad spirit of taking the local culture that was there and maybe making it a little more articulated, a little more coherent, and whatever. And so clearly, the 5 dimensions that we discuss in Scenescapes of authenticity. What is authenticity is a hot issue. And it doesn't have a clear black and white answer, that there's localism, there's neighborliness, and so there are different aspects of authenticity which you can bring in. The people I'm criticizing here most now are the sociologists, the anthropologists, and the political scientists, and then their ilk, their counterparts, who may write in the Wall Street Journal and say, you know, this is fluff. What we need is, what we should pay attention to is the market return, making money. Clearly making money is the driver. This is the core of capitalism. Okay, do the smart economists, do they say that? No. For 20 years here, the economists have been saying, look at amenities. Ed Glazer, the #1 urban economist in the world, Ed Glazer at Harvard, PhD from Chicago, he says the #1 drivers of urban transformation and development are markets? No. Amenities. Churches, concerts, security, schools, fun. These are amenities which, when we asked in the first class how many of you would move to the small town in North Dakota or stay here, you chose to cut your salary by half to stay here or in the big city because of the amenities. So Ed Glazer is simply articulating the same thing, and he's done it, and that is the 20, 30 years, economists have shown, and with lots of models, fancy abstract models and solid data, people are getting paid less. And this is part of what Richard Florida has a new book. In part, there's more income inequality in the hot cities, the growth cities, in part because people like you are willing to work for less, to work for half as much as you could earn elsewhere, because you want the amenities. That creates inequality of income. So the Gini coefficient shows there's more income inequality in these big cities. Okay, so you can say that's a policy problem. Poor people are being poor, but on the other hand, you may be the poor people. Grad students have often been, lower in income than used to be called, welfare workers, welfare moms. I mean, the welfare moms would get paid more than many of the grad students in past years. So in that sense, you're close enough to this that you can see some of this dynamic going on. Now, is that temporary? For sure. But how much and in what way is open to discussion. How to handle this for say low-income folks? Clearly, we've got lots of debate and discussion. I told you I missed that meeting. I missed this class here because I went into that meeting. I can't talk about specifics yet, but the more general point is in Bronzeville. We're dealing with the biggest. This is going to transform Bronzeville totally. I mean, the Michael Reese site is just south of McCormick Place. It's a massive area, something like 94 acres. It's the largest open land area in the whole city of Chicago. And so we're reviewing proposals from the city, put out a request for proposals. And the proposals came in, and I was on the committee as we met with the aldermen a series of times. And will continue for a couple of years now with working with the developers. How to use culture to build a creative place is exactly what we're talking about in practice. And so I'm making simply the point that this can be done in a big scale, as with MOCUS or with the French Ministry of Culture, but it also can be done in a very small, specific scale, such as DIY urbanism or Theaster Gates with One House, Listening House, or the Black Cinema. That is, those specific institutions which he's honed and made work so well are things which we ought to talk about, but we can try to do so by moving up with some of the, I'm suggesting, let's use the cases, but try to link the cases with the broader themes so you can generalize. That's the rationale. Okay, we got about 10 minutes. Let's discuss some of this. Do I have anybody who's an official presenter today?
Yeah.
Student. Okay. Why don't you lead off if you want to?
There's 3 of us. We like worked on it together.
Okay, great. Yeah, you want any PowerPoint or anything or?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now it's the floor is yours. Why don't you introduce yourselves, maybe briefly?
Yes.
Isn't that it? There's no plug right there on the table.
This, I don't think this will take up time. It's really helpful.
I have one.
Oh.
Display is off. I'm turning display on and the left, and you're using the left one. I just pressed the button and turned on the display.
Yeah, it's powering up now.
Yeah. Anything else that we're?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's
Should be working.
Oh, there we go.
The rest of you can think about a comment or question, or maybe start with something now slowly based on what I said in your readings in the area as they start getting going, as you see here. Responsible gentrification is making its way across. Challenging labels, folks, right?
Okay, there we go.
How do you
Beautiful.
define responsible?
Okay, so I'm Sam.
I'm Monica. And I'm Adriana.
And we kind of took the
Are you all in the college?
Yeah,
I'm
we're
a
all
first
here.
I'm a first year.
Okay.
Yeah.
First year, all right.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah, I'm a second year. Okay.
Okay, so great.
We kind of took a look at the video, the Oklahoma City video that was assigned for today, and looked at that through the framework of the 3 types of gentrification that was laid out in the reading.
Fantastic.
So kind of to give some background on that, there's 8 points, this MAPS 3 that the mayor of Oklahoma City implemented,
Right.
to try and increase density. So you got the convention center, public park, and the bottom one, the 4 aquatic wellness centers are kind of the most contentious ones, which we'll touch on when we kind of get into a more critical look at this. But the park is,
About this.
you-
So one of the main things of the MAPS 3 plan is to put a huge central park in downtown Oklahoma City, and they're currently working on it. They're planning to have the north section finished in 2019 and the south section finished in 2021. But it's going to be like 70 acres, and this is a proposed view of what it's going to look like, and then we have another picture of it. That's another imagined view of what this will look like in a few years.
But basically, like throughout their plan, all of the things that they proposed were cultural essentially and changes in lifestyle, and they were focusing on this cultural shift to attract people. And so they didn't have any like direct policy to make that change. But we saw that there were actual changes. So for example, they have about the time that it was implemented or started to be implemented, there was like a significant drop in unemployment rates. Now, as a disclaimer, this was also like there was a general drop in unemployment around this time in the US, but we found that it dropped much quicker than it did on a national scale. And so we think that it may be connected to that.
Yeah, so this is the national drop, and as you can see, it was much more gradual than Oklahoma City, which dropped pretty drastically.
So we ended up comparing it though to Denver, which is, they have similar populations. They're both around 650,000. Denver's about 700 now. But we just compared it because they showed growth in around the same time frame. But what we noticed with Oklahoma City is that you don't see some of the traditional signs of gentrification. There wasn't any significant change by ethnic bounds, and you didn't really see a change either in like education levels of the people coming, or the rent. The rent only changed by about $70. As
opposed to about 50% increase in Denver.
Yeah.
And kind of, Adrian is from Denver, but kind of the reason that Denver experienced this boom was because of the legalization of marijuana and all the growth in industry that came with that. But it showed, as she talked about, a lot more gentrification symptoms, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And so like one thing in the big, like the difference was that Oklahoma City seemed to have a much more structured plan for how they wanted to change the population. They wanted to attract younger people. They made like very specific changes to the infrastructure, like making it more walkable and changing the highway system, whereas in Denver there was this one lifestyle change or like one legislative change that happened, but they didn't really make other plans for it. And so as a result of that, there's been like a shortage of housing and people have been pushed out. So they planned a lot less for it and they got these like traditional negative effects of gentrification, versus Oklahoma City planned it out a lot more. It was much more top down, and so they've been able to control these kind of factors.
And so we've got kind of 3 questions.
Yeah. So I guess like one of the questions for that specifically is like, so is that a model that should be reproduced then? Should the government have this more top-down, very structured plan into how they want the culture to shift and what kind of people they want to come in and change the scene? Or should you have it happen in a more organic way like happened in Denver, but then you have the negative effects of gentrification?
And one of the questions I had was, Oklahoma City, for the most part, has had a lot of positive effects from like a government-controlled gentrification and change, but this does kind of conflict, I think, with like the American ideals of like the American dream and working your way up and having the freedom to kind of choose your lifestyle and have it being based on capitalistic ideals. So this kind of like government-controlled, almost socialist kind of gentrification, does that really align with the American dream, and is that something that could be implemented on a large scale?
And then the last question that we had was looking at the idea specifically of buzz. In the video, the mayor talked about how this change was primarily due to being on a list of most obese cities, and that this change produced a lot of buzz that came from this like radical decision that was all over the news, but that the way that buzz was created here was by focusing on the current citizens and on like just like one aspect of the lives of the current citizens. And we talked about how in Chicago a lot of the buzz that we've talked about in class has been with trying to bring in people from outside of the city, such as with Lollapalooza. You're trying to draw a national crowd, and how that's a very different sort of buzz that is the eventual end goal. And so if there's some way that Chicago could be trying to follow this more citizen-based buzz model, and what that might look like.
Good stuff. All right. Questions, comments, or yeah, a little applause here. Either narrowly to them or more generally on what I said, or both, ideally. Play Tuckvillian. Okay.
I think like the Oklahoma City model is super interesting just because it was like not a very dense city to begin with, so you had a lot of land to play with, like from a city planning perspective. And in listening to the mayor talk about his planning initiatives, it certainly seemed like that could be a model for change, not necessarily for existing infrastructure, but for places that are lacking it. You know, like I know Chicago is working on being like a more biker-friendly area, but it is just a lot more constrained by land. You know, half of it is bordered by a lake, but also just in terms of the density that currently exists in like the greater metro area too. And so for other cities like that are maybe less densely populated, that sort of like comprehensive planning model could be a way to continue like a lot of these different initiatives. Like it was spurred by the obesity factor, but then there are a lot of things that they're addressing in that whole city planning list. It's not just obesity.
I mean, just to mention, the fact that you can reduce the weight of the average citizen in Oklahoma is mind-blowing. I mean, it's amazingly ambitious. And then it worked. This most of what you featured is more standard stuff, but to include obesity as well, amazing. Okay, so in that sense, it's a strong, powerful case of how much local leadership and innovation can really transform even obesity of individuals. Okay. Other reactions? Comments? All right, well, questions are there. We're at the end of our hour. Thank you, folks. We will carry on Wednesday.